After the horrible whitewash in Australia in 2012, it was a time of change. Some senior pros were out, some veterans, battle-scarred from Australia, remained. So, when Australia came to India in 2013, it was touted as a grudge match. Remember, India had lost 1-2 to England. It was their first ever series loss in about 12 to 13 years. And it was still fresh, the wounds. So, Australia seemed to be the favourites heading into the Border-Gavaskar Trophy in 2013. But then what happened? It resulted in absolute acrimony, and India managed to turn the tables on Australia in a spectacular manner. It began in Chennai. In Chennai, captains led from the front. Virat Kohli in particular scored his first home century against Australia. But it was Michael Clarke who led the charge first with Australia when he hit 380. But Thala Dhoni, before he became Thala Dhoni and became the ultimate supremo of Chennai, he already owned their hearts when he hit 224, the highest score by an Indian wicket-keeper at that point in time. It was truly a fabulous and game-changing innings that saw Australia being routed in Chennai. And that was when the wheels had started to come off. Australia were trailing 1-0 and things only became worse for them in Hyderabad. Murli Vijay and Cheteshwar Pujara among several other knocks that he would play later in the course of the series against Australia, continued to hurt them, and Australia crumbled to an innings defeat in Hyderabad. Did things get any better for them? No. In Mohali, one day was washed out entirely by the rain. But on day 2, we saw something spectacular. Shikhar Dhawan, a new star, had arrived in this international stage, and he absolutely tore the Australian bowling to shreds. 187 runs, 33 fours, 2 sixes. No Australian bowler was spared. The boundaries at Mohali were absolutely peppered, and he had registered the highest score by an Indian debutant in Test match cricket, and India absolutely bossed the session. Although Australia did mount a fight back, but Shikhar Dhawan's 187 had ensured that India emerged victorious in a tense encounter at Mohali. Remember, it went to the final day. In the final session, 6 wickets India won by, but it was a very, very close game. But when we headed to Delhi on a minefield, Nathan Lyon took 7 wickets. India's batsmen struggled, so did Australia's batters. But in the end, it took Cheteshwar Pujara's calm and composed knock, and for only the second time in Australia's history, they were whitewashed, or in the case of India, they were brownwashed. 4-0, revenge was sweet. MS Dhoni had stamped his class as captain, and India had gotten what they wanted. A 4-0 whitewash and an emphatic way to regain the Border-Gavaskar Trophy. It was truly a spectacular rebound because after the series loss at home to England, this tasted a whole lot sweeter. The 2014-15 Border-Gavaskar Trophy start itself was marred by tragedy. The death of Phil Hughes had actually shaken the world of cricket. And many of the players, many of the administrators felt that could cricket go on? In a funeral that was attended by the Indian players and by thousands of Australians, they paid a tearful tribute to Phil Hughes. And that is why the start of the series itself was rescheduled and postponed. The first test happened in Adelaide. And in the shadow of a very, very emotional loss, Australia and India played out a classic. David Warner set the stage rolling with a brilliant century in both innings, and he was ably supported by Michael Clarke leading from the front and Steve Smith. Remember, this would be the series that would see Steve Smith actually dominate the world, and it was the start of a new term in cricket called Fab Four. Smith, Warner and Clarke's centuries ensured Australia got a big lead, but Virat Kohli stepped up and showed that he really loved Adelaide with a brilliant century in the first innings. Australia batted again and Warner scored yet another century. But as the match progressed, there were already tensions. India and Australian players were engaged in verbal banter, and that did not make for some attractive viewing. On the fifth day, India needed 364 runs to win. They had to counter Nathan Lyon, who had already taken 5 wickets in the first innings. Now he was going to be their major threat. After taking the wickets of Shikhar Dhawan and Cheteshwar Pujara, Australia had to wait for a long time because Murli Vijay and Virat Kohli stepped up and scored brilliant knocks. Murli Vijay was on 99 and Virat Kohli registered yet another century, back-to-back centuries in Adelaide, putting him in a very elite list. But when Nathan Lyon trapped Murli Vijay LBW for 99, the cat was set amongst the pigeons. India suffered a catastrophic collapse, and when Kohli was dismissed, India fell short by 48 runs. Nathan Lyon ended with 12 wickets, including 7 in the second innings. Australia had paid the ultimate tribute to Phil Hughes, and they had taken a 1-0 lead against some very, very disciplined and almost superhuman batting from Virat Kohli. Now, with Australia winning in Adelaide, the series shifted to Brisbane. In Brisbane, Steve Smith showed yet again that he is one of the best players in the world at that time by yet another century, and he got great support from Mitchell Starc and the tail. However, Australia had to work very hard because in the first innings was Murli Vijay's century that set the stage for India reaching a great total. Australia, though, were boosted by Hazelwood, Josh Hazelwood's 5-wicket haul, and that is why they could not reach a bigger total. However, Australia had gotten a vital lead, and that was the occasion and that was the moment when Mitchell Johnson showed his class. Johnson took 4 wickets on an up and down pitch, and he had broken the back of the Indian batting. Although Shikhar Dhawan, who was injured in the nets, came out and batted and scored a gritty 81, it was not enough as Australia managed to win the Brisbane Test and extend their lead to 2-0. Heading into Melbourne, it was yet again a Kohli versus Smith classic. Virat Kohli and Ajinkya Rahane stitched a 262-run stand, and it was essential that India managed to get a big total in. But Steve Smith yet again showed that he was the master of his own work, and he had scored 192 of the finest runs. On a very flat Melbourne deck, Australia held out for a draw and they had won the Border-Gavaskar Trophy series. But the Melbourne Test would be overshadowed by a sudden announcement that Mahendra Singh Dhoni was announcing his retirement from Test cricket. It was a bolt out of the blue, vintage typical Dhoni, and India were suddenly pushed into a new era. The same would be said about the Sydney Test. Kohli versus Smith, both scoring centuries, and on a flat deck it was KL Rahul who, after the horrors of Melbourne, notched up a brilliant century. But bowlers from both sides had to toil hard. The Sydney Test also ended in a draw, and Australia had won the series 2-0. What started with tragedy then ended in the utmost of draws, and Australia's 2-0 win could have felt a little bit empty because Melbourne and Sydney unfortunately did not live up to top-class billing. Australia may have won 2-0, but India were now determined to ensure that they would hold their grip on the Border-Gavaskar Trophy in a big way. By now, the Border-Gavaskar Trophy was becoming more of a ping-pong machine. Once Australia got it, then India had it. Then Australia wrested it again in 2014-15, and it was now the turn of India. But in the 2017 series, India had to slog and work their way up, because in 2014-15, the Fab 2 of the Fab 4 had already cemented their place in the annals of modern day cricket as the greatest. 2 years later, with their passion and determination still at fever pitch, these two giants collided, and in the first game in Pune, you got a glimpse of that, how epic the series is going to be. The ball was turning square, pitching it on leg, going way outside off, pitching it on off, spinning way back in on leg stump. Yet, Steve Smith showed that why he is the master of these conditions. Steve Smith scored a brilliant 100 and aided by Steve O'Keefe's 6 for 35 in both the innings. Australia had dictated terms and they got off the mark by winning by 333 runs in Pune. It was a fantastic showing from Australia because they had come into the series on the back of huge losses in India in 2013, then a whitewash in Sri Lanka and a whitewash in the UAE against Pakistan. Against a potent Indian batting and bowling lineup, the win in Pune set them off on a big course and onto something very historic. But unfortunately, the ecstasy and the brilliance of Pune would not last because in a highly volatile and highly tempered Bangalore test match, tensions were at fever pitch. Nathan Lyon had taken 8 for 50, but Australia squandered their advantage. Needing 175 to win, there was a lot of drama. Steve Smith was given out LBW, and it was believed that he looked at the Australian dressing room whether he could consult for a DRS. That got Virat Kohli angry and he engaged in a massive showdown with the umpires and with Steve Smith. That feud ignited what was already a very volatile Border-Gavaskar Trophy. Australia collapsed. Ravichandran Ashwin took 6 wickets and India had squared the series in dramatic style. Virat Kohli had said that the emotions that he had experienced in Bangalore, it made this win one of the best that he ever had. But the feud that was ignited with Steve Smith's DRS controversy was very ugly and it did not go down well. The accusations of cheating just about stopped where the line would have been crossed. Did Steve Smith look at the dressing room? Was he consulted? Did he consult the Australian dressing room? Was Virat Kohli justified in his outburst? We may never know. But it was a truly acrimonious test match and one that would lay the stage that the Border-Gavaskar Trophy would be the most fiercely contested in the world. On an absolute road in Ranchi, we saw 4 players. I have put 3 here, but 4 players actually stamped their class. Steve Smith hit another brilliant century, but it was Cheteshwar Pujara and Wriddhiman Saha who actually dominated. Pujara scored a double 100, Wriddhiman Saha a brilliant century, and the 300 plus run stand ensured that this test match would head into a draw. On the final day, Peter Handscomb managed to rescue Australia with a very gritty knock. Yet, the match would be remembered after 7 years because after a gap of 7 years, Pat Cummins came back and he showed that why he was touted as Australia's best when he picked up 4 wickets on an absolute road. It was also the test match where Virat Kohli got injured. It was the first injury that he had sustained and he was going to miss a series decider. 1-1 heading into Dharamshala. What would happen? As you would see in 2017, in one of the most attritional test matches played, India managed to get the upper hand. Ajinkya Rahane came out to captain and Kuldeep Yadav was handed a debut. Steve Smith managed to score yet another brilliant century, but Kuldeep Yadav's guile, in addition to some very hostile Indian bowling, ensured that Australia unfortunately collapsed and India managed to knock off the runs and win the Border-Gavaskar Trophy. This win was the culmination of a golden period in Indian cricket where they had beaten South Africa, they had beaten England, they had beaten New Zealand, they had beaten Bangladesh, and now they had beaten Australia. They now had every trophy that they could win in their kitty. That was a really good record to have. The Border-Gavaskar Trophy was the most fiercely contested and India managed to snatch it back in an emphatic way in Dharamshala. The beautiful hills of the Dauladhar mountain ranges ensured that India were indeed at the summit of world cricket. After India had secured the Border-Gavaskar Trophy in the most tense circumstances in 2017, India and Australia collided in 2018, but this time India held the initiative. Adelaide was not going to host the pink ball test, and on top of that, Australia were missing the services of Steve Smith and David Warner, both banned because of the ball tampering scandal that happened in Newlands. A dominant, buoyant India really set the stage on fire and Australia just had no answer. In Adelaide, it was Cheteshwar Pujara's magnificent century that got India off the mark, and some great bowling from Ravichandran Ashwin and some gritty all-round performances ensured India held their nerve and they won by 31 runs in the Adelaide Test. But even a weak Australia is a dangerous Australia. Kohli set the stage on fire with a century in Perth, but it was Australia's bowlers that gave them the advantage. Australia, bearing the brunt, bearing the bruises, managed to turn the tables on India, and despite Mohammad Shami's 6 for 56, Australia had won the test in grand style and they had levelled the series 1-1. But that ecstasy would not last. Cheteshwar Pujara scored yet another century in Melbourne, and this time India had found a new sensation in Jasprit Bumrah. His 6 wickets in the first innings combined with 3 wickets in the second innings ensured India held the advantage. Despite Pat Cummins' 6 wickets and India getting only 106, it proved to be of no use as India eliminated 37 years of pain and they won the Boxing Day Test to take a 2-1 lead. In Sydney, Cheteshwar Pujara and a new sensation of Rishabh Pant tore the Australian attack to shreds. And finally, those two scored centuries and Kuldeep Yadav's 5 wickets ensured Australia had no way back. Rain though had the final say in Sydney and unfortunately the game could be washed out, but India had created history by winning the Border-Gavaskar Trophy in Australia for the first time. They had become the first Asian nation to win a series down under. It was a testament at the high point in Virat Kohli's captaincy that he could finally ensure India, after nearly 71 years of trying, they finally managed to win in Australia and tick what was a significant box. 2 years later, India would be back in Australia. This time, Australia would be back with their core players. India were still with their strengths, but in a transition phase. In the pink ball test in Adelaide, where batting was made very, very difficult, it was Virat Kohli who gave India the impetus with a brilliant 74. But his run out ensured that Australia got the advantage back. Tim Paine played a very gritty knock and ensured Australia's lead and Australia's deficit would not be that much high. But then came yet another calamitous collapse, and one which would ensure that a lot of opposition fan bases would troll India for a very long time. Josh Hazlewood's 5 wickets and Pat Cummins' 4 wickets ensured India would be bowled out for a horrendous 36, and Australia, in a dramatic twist of fate, managed to win the Adelaide Test match and take a 1-0 lead. A team that is generally bowled out for 36, they would have mental scars, right? Not this Indian team. Because for the remainder of the 3 games, they would miss Virat Kohli because he was heading back home for a paternity leave. He was soon going to become a father. India, with the scars of 36, they now had a new captain in Ajinkya Rahane. And Rahane led from the front in the Boxing Day Test. In the Boxing Day Test, Ajinkya Rahane managed to score a brilliant century, but it was the bowlers who did the damage. Jasprit Bumrah, like he had done in 2018, made Melbourne his own with a dramatic spell, and he was well assisted by Mohammad Siraj, as Australia just could not get going. Ajinkya Rahane's century also got a boost from a very good knock by Ravindra Jadeja, and their partnership ensured Australia had no way back. In a sensational test match, Ajinkya Rahane led from the front and he won the Man of the Match award as Australia were found wanting. India managed to win for the second consecutive time in Melbourne and the series was level 1-1. Heading into Sydney, Steve Smith, who had a relatively low-key affair until now, showed that he still wanted to hurt India and he hit a brilliant century. He was well supported by Marnus Labuschagne. But India faced an uphill task because they had a big deficit. And Australia only made it harder for them when they batted solidly in the second innings as well. But in the 4th innings, India really wanted to show that they could chase the target down. Rishabh Pant's blitz 97 and Cheteshwar Pujara's stonewalling ensured that India had a faint chance. But when Rishabh Pant fell to Nathan Lyon, Australia held the decisive edge. In came Hanuma Vihari and Ravichandran Ashwin, and for 42 overs, they were like battle-scarred warriors and they kept Australia at bay. Tim Paine's leadership melted and he dropped catches at will also. And that was the point in which Australia felt that a golden opportunity was lost. Hanuma Vihari and Ravichandran Ashwin held firm, and that is how India managed to draw in Sydney. But yet again, Sydney had very, very ugly affairs for the Indian cricket team. Why is that? Because during the course of the test match, Mohammad Siraj had complained that he was racially abused, and the Sydney crowd themselves had made themselves no favor. They had done no favors to themselves. Police had to vacate a certain section of the crowd out. Racism, Sydney, it was once again a hark back to the 2008 nightmare, but luckily it did not escalate. Now heading into Brisbane, Australia's fortress for the last 30 years. How could India cope up? Australia still had their core. A team that had played over 200 tests combined. Australia's problem, unfortunately, now was that India were now reduced to a sea strength team. What had happened in Australia? India in Sydney, unfortunately, Jasprit Bumrah was out, Hanuma Vihari was out, Ravichandran Ashwin was out, Ravindra Jadeja was out. The entire bench strength had to be used, and the combined experience of the Indian cricket team was actually 1/40th of the Australian team. So what happened? Marnus Labuschagne hit a century, and that set the stage for Australia to do very well. India were staring down the barrel with 5 wickets down, and they just could not know what to do. In came Washington Sundar and Shardul Thakur, and their partnership of 123 runs was gold dust, because the deficit that they had was very, very less when you look at when they were 5 wickets down. Once again, Australia tried to build upon that lead that they had, but Mohammad Siraj with 5 wickets and Shardul Thakur ensured that India could chase 328, but could they do it? History was not favourable to India, but on the final day, Shubman Gill's masterclass laid the base. Then we saw Cheteshwar Pujara's defiance, but India created history when Rishabh Pant scored 89. And when he hit that 4th long off of Josh Hazlewood, the Gabatoire was no more. A fortress was breached. India had done the unthinkable. After 33 years, the Gaba fortress was no more. India had won by 3 wickets, and they had won the Border-Gavaskar Trophy in the grandest style possible. This win at the Gaba was on par with 1983, 2007, 2011, 2013. It changed Indian cricket forever. It showed that there was so much depth in the Indian team that no other nation would even come close. They had found new heroes, Washington Sundar, Shardul Thakur, Rishabh Pant. For Rishabh Pant, he cemented himself as India's greatest overseas match winner. A 2-1 series win, and in the most dramatic of circumstances, India had won the Border-Gavaskar Trophy. And that is why Part 3 was India's dominance of the Border-Gavaskar Trophy. Thank you so much, folks, for listening to this special 3-part history of the Border-Gavaskar Trophy. The test matches are just a couple of days away. We hope that the 2023 edition adds one more chapter in what is truly one of cricket's greatest rivalry. Tap the bell icon so you know when we go live and when we create more videos from Sports Today. Press the like, comment and share button. We are also on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram also. Thank you.